The horrible case of Peter Porco. Peter Porco and Joan Balzano met in college in the 70s, where he was training to become a lawyer, and she was focusing on studying to become a children's speech pathologist. The young couple was very much in love and decided to start a life together. They married in 1974, and since then, they had settled in a house in Del Mar, within Albany County, where they lived for the rest of their lives. Years later, the Porco family grew with the arrival of their first son, Jonathan, in 1981, and 2 years later, in 1983, their second and last son, Christopher, was born. Peter dedicated much of his career to being a prosecutor, but in his later years, when his sons had reached adulthood, he opted for a job that would allow him to be more relaxed and enjoy free time with his wife. Later on, when his eldest son graduated as a sailor and was stationed at the base assigned to him in South Carolina, and the younger Christopher moved to the University of Rochester campus, where he studied biomedical engineering, Peter left the prosecutor's office to start working within the Court of Appeals. By the year 2000, the Porco's place was empty, yet the family never lost contact with each other, especially Christopher, who visited them more regularly because the distance allowed it. However, by the end of 2004, their relationship began to go through a rough patch when Peter and Joan discovered that Christopher was not fully committed to his studies. His grades were not good, he hardly ever attended classes, and he constantly spent time partying with his campus friends. The news disappointed his parents, and as a result, a long argument broke out among them. A week later, in the early hours of November 15, 2004, someone broke into the Porco's house, and the discussion between Peter, Joan, and Christopher was concluded forever. The clock hands pointed to 9 in the morning, marking the time Peter was supposed to go to work. An important day awaited him and his colleagues at the court. Minutes passed, but Peter did not come through the door. His boss began to worry, as it was not common for him to miss work. But if he had reasons to do so, he always notified in advance. Something was wrong, and they had to find out. They called him repeatedly by phone, but in vain. Peter did not answer. Then, his supervisor sent a court security officer to check that everything was all right at the Peter's house. The officer arrived at the place around 11 in the morning. From the outside, he could see that something was not right. The key that would open the front door was placed on the outside, but it also had a peculiar detail. It was stained with blood. Without hesitation, he called the supervisor and reported the situation. Both knew something was not right. The supervisor ordered him to enter the house in search of a concrete answer, but first he warned him to be cautious, as he did not know what he might find. Just a few steps down the entrance hallway, the officer discovered that he was inside a crime scene. The house was in disarray, and there was no corner that was not stained with blood. A massacre had occurred there. The officer reported the discovery to the police authorities, and they arrived at the scene immediately, launching a large operation at the Porco family home. The police found the place exactly as had been described in the phone call by the informant, following the bloodstains that led them to the main bedroom, where they discovered an even worse scene. On the matrimonial bed lay Joan, Peter's wife, who had also sustained severe injuries from the attacker, with the axe used as a weapon beside her. The scene was dreadful, drenched in blood, and Joan was horrifically disfigured, yet astonishingly, she was alive. Alerting the authorities with a raised hand, the paramedics swiftly transported her to the nearest hospital, despite her slim chances of survival. Her injuries were severe. Her skull was fractured, exposing her brain. Her jaw was shattered, and she had lost an eye, rendering her survival nearly impossible. In the ambulance, a case investigator seized the opportunity to question her. Aware of her surroundings yet unable to speak, Joan communicated through head movements. When asked if she recognized the attacker, she nodded, denying Jonathan as the assailant and confirming Christopher with another nod. Her repeated affirmation left no doubt. Christopher, her son, was the attacker. The paramedics, bearing witness to this critical testimony, urged caution in further questioning to prevent jeopardizing her condition. Upon arrival at the hospital, Joan underwent a 12-hour surgery, with her survival far from assured. Meanwhile, investigators, armed with the accused's identity, embarked on a thorough search for evidence to solidify Christopher's guilt. Returning to the crime scene, they meticulously examined every detail, piecing together the sequence of the attack. Initially confused by Peter's body's location near the kitchen on the ground floor, they were astounded by the autopsy results. Peter and his wife were attacked while sleeping, but surprisingly he had survived the initial assault of at least 16 axe wounds, as the injuries did not immediately end his life. Remarkably, on the morning of November 15th, around 5:30 a.m., Peter woke up as if it were any ordinary day, unaware of the gravity of his condition. He proceeded with his morning routine, washing his face and preparing breakfast and lunch for work, oblivious to the tragedy that had unfolded in his home. He wrote a check to cover the fines that his son Christopher had accumulated due to his reckless driving, and went out to the porch of his house to look for the newspaper. He noticed that the door had closed behind him, and he was locked out. Subsequently, he looked for the key he hid among the plants, re-entered the house, and collapsed. His body could no longer withstand it, so he lay down beside the kitchen. Every step, every movement Peter made that morning left large bloodstains, but he was not aware of it. The investigators learned from the autopsy that the axe had caused wounds in the superficial area of the brain, but not in the internal part, where people store activities they frequently do, explaining why he moved normally that morning. On the other hand, the police authorities discovered that the entry had not been forced and that the key they had found on the door was the one Peter had used to re-enter the house, not the attacker. Moreover, the person they were looking for knew the security alarm code that monitored the house, but had taken the trouble to destroy the device. The house was in disarray, drawers open and belongings scattered everywhere, but nothing of value was missing. It was evident that the criminal had staged the scene to simulate a robbery with a fatal outcome. This theory was confirmed when they discovered that a protective metal mesh covering one of the windows from the outside was broken. Trying to open it, they noticed it was locked from the inside and only opened a few inches, making it impossible for a person to escape through there. The attacker had managed to flee the scene without leaving a single footprint or any trace of their DNA, but was not smart enough to hide their macabre plan. It was clear that their only goal was to murder the couple, and then it was time for the investigators to prove why. While Joan fought for her life in the hospital, the police authorities met with Christopher after he contacted them to inquire about what had happened to his parents. It turned out that the youngest son had received a call from a journalist who wanted information about the case, which is why Christopher called the police to know the truth. When they finally informed him that someone had broken into his parents' house, killed Peter, and injured Joan, Christopher showed no reaction. At no point did he seem overwhelmed by the severity of the situation. This caught the investigators' attention, but they had to remain calm and agreed to meet at the hospital where Joan was recovering. There, they had a 6-hour talk in which Christopher claimed that on the night of the crime, he had fallen asleep in a common area on campus. During his statement, a patrol went to the university where the 21-year-old studied, and the officers spoke with his peers, and what they told them did not help at all in proving his innocence. His peers described him as a friendly and humble guy, even though they knew Christopher belonged to a wealthy family that could afford great luxuries. He never acted superior to others. The police were alerted by these statements, as they knew the Porco family had a good socio-economic status, but they were far from being rich, They then understood that the young man had been lying to his friends all this time. On the other hand, the young students assured that they had seen Christopher on the afternoon of November 14th, in the common area where they gathered to watch television, and also in the morning of the 15th, but he had not been there during the night by any means. Everything began to indicate that Christopher was the only suspect. But then, 3 weeks after the incident, Joan woke up from the medically induced coma she had been in, and the investigation took an unexpected turn. The crime survivor was notified about the accusation she had made against her son, minutes before being admitted to the hospital. At that moment, Joan denied what the investigators were informing her. She said it was impossible that she had made such an accusation. She didn't remember anything from that day, and it was impossible that Christopher would attack them in that way. When she regained consciousness, Joan suffered from short-term memory loss, perhaps due to the trauma she had experienced, or maybe she just wanted to defend her son. The truth was that as soon as she denied Christopher being responsible for killing her husband, the investigation abruptly regressed. Thus, the progress they had made until then was paused for a moment. The authorities were forced to consider other possible lines of investigation that did not involve Christopher, so they decided to turn the search towards Peter's job. Since the man worked in the Court of Appeals, where family cases were usually presented as part of his job, some time ago, Peter had denied a man custody of his children. The violent reaction of that individual was accompanied by murder threats directed at Peter, which numerous witnesses were able to testify. The investigators pursued this theory and met with the possible suspect. However, it turned out to be a waste of time, as the man had a solid alibi. The agents returned to Theory 1. No one knew where Christopher had been on the night of November 15th. They then reviewed the timeline in which the house alarm had been deactivated, marked around 12:15 in the morning. At that same moment, the telephone lines had been cut. Then they knew they were back in operation around 5 in the morning. Furthermore, they accessed Peter's private information, specifically his email. What they found there were clues that brought them closer to their main suspect. Once again, everything led to Christopher. A week before the murder, Peter sent an email to Christopher, informing him that he had learned from his bank that he had taken out a $31,000 loan without his authorization. The man expressed his anger and disappointment in that message for having lied to him, and warned him that if it happened again, he would have to report him. Subsequently, he clarified to his son that Joan, his mother, was worried about his actions, wanted to see him, and that whatever happened, they could solve it. The investigators had found a compelling motive for Christopher to decide to end his parents' lives, but now it was time to find concrete evidence. They went once again to the university and requested access to the security cameras, and that's how they saw the footage capturing the yellow Jeep, which belonged to the suspect, leaving the campus on the night of the 14th, around 10:30 p.m. According to the agent's calculations, if Christopher had driven on the highway, he had enough time to reach his parents' house by 2 a.m. They needed to prove that he was driving the vehicle, so they approached the toll booths on the highway that connected the university to the house in Delmar. The employees assured they had seen a yellow Jeep that night. They remembered it because it was speeding. One of the witnesses said it was a young white male, but still, a piece of evidence was missing to effectively prove it. Then, the investigators embarked on a meticulous job. They knew that those who passed through the tolls received a ticket, which they then had to present at the next one to be charged the corresponding rate. These tickets were stored in boxes by the employees, who always operated with gloves. They requested the box containing all the tickets collected that day and sent them to be analyzed, one by one, in a laboratory in order to obtain Christopher's DNA from one of them. And so it happened. One of the tickets had been handled by the boy. Everything fit perfectly. They finally had what they needed to arrest him. It took the authorities a year of investigation, and in that way, they managed to arrest Christopher Porco for murdering his father and attempting to do the same with his mother. To regain his freedom, he had to pay a bail of $250,000, which paradoxically, Joan Porco and her friends took care of collecting so that Christopher could return to his regular life. The young man moved in with his mother while waiting to stand trial. During this period, Joan continued insisting to the authorities to leave her son alone and raised her discontent in a public letter, which was released in the media. In it, she asked the investigators to stop pursuing her son and to focus on finding the real criminal. But after several more months, the time for the trial came. Christopher arrived at the venue accompanied by his mother, whom he was arm in arm with, and the round of statements began. The prosecution presented all the evidence positioning Christopher as the sole responsible for the atrocious crime, while the defense attempted to exonerate him by questioning certain aspects. On one hand, they wondered how it was possible that if Christopher had been the murderer, he left the house without the slightest trace of blood. On the other hand, they claimed he could never have driven to his parents' house because no young person has that much cash on hand to stop for gasoline and pay at the toll booths. This was because the opposing side knew very well that the boy had removed the electronic device for toll collection, using cash to avoid being tracked. As absurd as these arguments sounded, the jury still had to meet to determine a verdict, taking into account all the information provided by the investigators. Christopher had a financial motive. No one knew where he had been on the morning of November 15th, until the cameras captured him driving his yellow Jeep, and he was one of the few who knew the code to the house alarm. Additionally, one of the witnesses at the trial was his former boss, the owner of a veterinary clinic where Christopher had worked and where he had learned how to avoid being splattered with blood in surgery. The jury had no doubts at the time of their verdict. On August 10, 2006, Christopher Porco, the younger son of Peter and Joan, was sentenced to a total of 50 years in prison for the murder of his father and attempted murder against his mother. The image of a united family that the Porcos had portrayed throughout their lives ended in the past, with the terrible tragedy they went through at the hands of their youngest son. Christopher's criminal behavior, which they had kept silent and managed to hide for years, finally came to light on November 15, 2004. The whims of the boy, to be someone he was not, to invent a life he didn't have, and a social status he didn't belong to, led him to commit a series of crimes against his own parents. The fatal outcome didn't just happen. To sustain the lies he had told throughout his time at university, he repeatedly stole belongings from his parents and friends, which he then sold on the internet, where he ironically scammed people. When it was time to deliver the products, he didn't, and later he impersonated his brother's identity and used his account to tell buyers that Christopher had passed away. On multiple occasions, he forged Peter's signature to obtain loans from the bank, and so financed the yellow Jeep truck. When he had no way out, he decided to murder them to keep the money and assets of his parents. Even days before the act, he approached a financial investor for advice, as he would soon receive a large sum of money that he wanted to invest. The case of Peter Porco clearly shows how far a person lacking feelings, but full of greed, can go. It also highlighted the impeccable work of the investigators, who, even with the victim against them, used all their tools, and even more, to finally do justice for Peter Porco. This case still causes controversy within the community, with some believing that Christopher's conviction was fair, while others believe he was not the author of the terrible murder. And that's the end of today's case. As always, I appreciate your support for my work. If you subscribe, like, and share this video, it will help me continue creating content. This was another episode of Unreal True Crime. See you soon. Day after day, we are surrounded by the presence of criminals. We are spectators to the deepest darkness in human actions and the bizarre reality that someone's suffering can be a form of pleasure. As dedicated investigators of the criminal world, we're on a mission to uncover the most shocking crimes and get inside the minds of those who commit them. I am Luke, and today I bring you another unreal true crime. The horrible case of Ella Bennett. Ella Bennett was born on April 12, 2002, in Georgia, USA, into a family beset by conflicts. To understand the environment she was born into and lived in during her short life, we must understand her mother, Charity Lee. Her life was fraught with challenges from a young age, marked by tragedy and later struggles with substance abuse and problematic relationships. Charity was born on the outskirts of Atlanta, Georgia, to Killa Clark Bennett and James Robert Bennett, Jr. A defining moment in her childhood occurred when she was just 6 years old. Her father, a 37-year-old trucking company owner, was fatally shot in a violent attack inside their home in an exclusive residential area of Atlanta. He was found with multiple gunshot wounds to his head, chest, and back. The police reported that he was alone at the time of the crime and that there were no signs of struggle at the scene. Initially, authorities suspected organized crime. However, the aftermath of James's funeral brought a shocking development. Charity's mother, Killa, then 29, became the prime suspect in his murder. The charges were laid just 3 days after the couple, previously divorced, had remarried in Las Vegas. Evidence against Killa included details like the unlocked doors of their home and her status as the primary heir to the trucking business. Additionally, the patrol officer who transported Killa post-arrest noted that she occasionally exhibited satisfaction in her demeanor. During the trial, evidence was presented suggesting Killa had been in contact with a truck driver and might have been involved in the crime. Despite this, the jury found her not guilty due to insufficient evidence, leading to her acquittal. The presiding judge described it as the most peculiar case of his career, given the variety of plausible angles and hypotheses. The controversy surrounding her father's death and her mother's high-profile trial deeply impacted Charity. During her mother's imprisonment, she was cared for by her maternal grandparents. Throughout her childhood and adolescence, Charity sought love and approval from her mother. In a desperate bid for attention, she intentionally turned to drugs, frustrated by her mother's apparent disinterest. At 17, Charity battled depression and heroin addiction, straining her relationship with her mother to the point of being kicked out of the house. With just $100 given by her mother, Charity faced a stark choice between rehabilitation and potential overdose. This money, however, became her lifeline as she chose to enter a rehabilitation center in Chattanooga, Tennessee. She achieved sobriety for about a year, finding a place to live and enrolling in college. Nevertheless, her journey to sobriety was fraught with internal battles against her darkest demons. Nevertheless, during these difficult moments, she attempted to end her life on several occasions. At the age of 18, Charity became pregnant with her first child and at 3 months pregnant, decided she must definitively leave behind that dark stage in her life to become the best mother for her unborn child. That baby, whom she named Paris, became the motivation she needed to recover. She often said that her son had saved her life. When Paris Lee Bennett was born on October 10, 1993, in Abilene, Texas, Charity was alone because the father of the child had left her as soon as he learned of the pregnancy. Later, when Paris was 17 months old, his father returned to their lives. Charity recounted that it was clear the father was not well, having been diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia and experiencing auditory and visual hallucinations. Paris was a very artistic and creative boy who enjoyed drawing. Beginning at the age of 3, he was introverted, not very sociable, and reluctant to show affection to people he knew. The boy, who dreamed of becoming a paleontologist, was focused on his academic life. He studied a lot, had an IQ of 142, and never had problems at school. His performance was much higher than his peers, and his teachers considered him a unique child with potential and a promising future. After having her baby, Charity married twice, but neither union was successful. One marriage was with a man named Brendan, but the circumstances of their breakup were not disclosed. In her desire to form a family, Charity started a relationship with a man named Jonathan, and at the age of 28, she became pregnant with her second child, a daughter. The news filled the family with joy, but initially, Paris did not seem happy about his mother's pregnancy, which worried Charity. However, once his sister was born, things changed. Paris fell in love with his sister, showing affection, protectiveness, and attentiveness towards her. Paris did not have many friends, and his little sister was his playmate. She was a loving, kind, intelligent, and very determined girl. From a young age, she demonstrated a compassionate nature, even expressing a desire for her mother to adopt all the hurt children in the world. Her loved ones described her as a little girl with a strong personality, always speaking her mind. Over the years, the happy home that Charity dreamed of turned into a nightmare. Her partner had serious alcoholism problems and was a violent man. According to Charity, the relationship ended when her husband was stopped by a police officer, and when asked to exit his vehicle, he refused. The officer reached into the car, and the driver sped off, dragging the officer along. The officer then shot and injured him in the leg. When Charity learned about the incident, she decided she could not allow her children to live in such circumstances, and chose to separate. The young girl enjoyed her relationship with her brother, finding fun and inspiration in playing with him, seeing him as a role model, and wanting to follow in his footsteps. Paris also appeared to enjoy his time with his younger sister. Childhood videos and photographs show them dancing, playing, and posing together, always smiling. In 2005, Charity and her children moved to Dallas, Texas, to be closer to Kyla, Charity's mother, who had been diagnosed with breast cancer. Charity was a loving mother, but the stress and anxiety from her partner's separation and disputes with her mother led her to relapse into drug use. During the 6 months that Charity was under the influence, Paris took on the role of the protective older brother, a situation that significantly changed his life. He no longer saw his mother as a loving figure, but as an unpleasant woman full of flaws and mistakes. Soon after, the three of them moved to Kyla's ranch in Seymour, Texas, where their lives became even more chaotic. It was during this time that a more emotionally unstable and violent side of Paris began to emerge. He had fits of rage, banging his head against the wall or throwing things on the floor to seek attention. However, Charity seemingly failed to interpret these signs. On one occasion, while living at Kyla's ranch, Paris broke a toy that his sister and a friend were playing with. Seeing this, Charity scolded and punished him. Minutes later, when his mother was away, Paris took a kitchen knife and ran out with it in his hand. Alarmed by the screams of one of the ranch workers, Charity and Kyla rushed to the scene and managed to disarm him after some struggle. Worried about her son and his violent outbursts, Charity took Paris to a psychiatric center. However, feeling that he was not given adequate attention, she decided to return home with her son. According to some accounts, there were other similar episodes later on. On one such occasion, Paris threatened his aunt and sister, leading Charity to take him again to a health center where he underwent various tests. The specialist told Charity that it was concerning for a child so young to have thoughts about harming others, recommending that she seek treatment for him. However, Charity did not take the psychiatrist's suggestions well, finding the evaluation erroneous and offensive, and disregarded the advice. Nonetheless, doubts about how to handle her son's situation lingered in her mind, and shortly after, the family moved to Abilene. Over time, Paris developed resentment towards his mother, leading to constant arguments between them. For Charity, although the changes in her son confused her, she didn't believe they were as serious as the psychologist had suggested. Unfortunately, she was mistaken. Then came February 4, 2007. That day, 13-year-old Paris was visibly upset with his mother from the morning. But as he was a teenager and fights between mother and son had become a daily occurrence, she didn't give it much thought. At that time, Charity was working at a well-known restaurant near Abilene and had hired a babysitter that day to help while she was at work. She thought she had faced worse things with Paris, and that, as in the past, everything would be resolved. So before leaving, she approached her son, kissed him, and told him she loved him. She had a demanding workday due to the Super Bowl. After midnight, around 12:30 a.m., on February 5, 2007, exhausted from the intense hours, Charity was cleaning tables at the restaurant, eager to finish her shift and return home to rest and see her children. That's when several police officers arrived at the establishment. As she went to find the manager, she heard her name mentioned in the office and felt terror. Confused and disoriented, she couldn't understand what was happening when an officer told her that her 4-year-old daughter was injured. Her immediate reaction was to ask what had happened and where her daughter was. Then, the officer informed her that her daughter had passed away. Unable to bear the shock, Charity fainted. There is nothing more terrifying for a mother than the death of a child. But the truth she heard from the police was much crueler and more painful than she could have imagined. While being taken by the police to the station, Charity asked about her son Paris, and an officer responded that they had him. This brief and stark answer made her realize her worst nightmare had come true. When she heard her daughter had died, she felt shattered. But learning that Paris was the perpetrator was like having those shattered pieces broken again. According to the police investigation, that night the babysitter had taken the kids out for Chinese food. They returned home and watched a children's movie. The little girl then went to her room to sleep, while Paris retreated to his because he had to finish his homework. It's unknown at what moment Paris decided to end his sister's life, but as a bright and manipulative teenager, around 10 at night, he managed to convince the babysitter she could go home, assuring her that his mother was on her way. With her absence, it would be easier for him to execute his plan. What happened once they were alone was a true scene of terror. Paris went to Ella's room, beat her, sexually abused the little girl, barely 4 years old, and suffocated her. Then, with a knife he had taken from the kitchen, he gave her 17 fatal stabs. Immediately after the attack, Paris picked up the phone and called a friend, engaging in a conversation about various topics. Roughly 2 minutes after ending this call, which lasted 6 minutes at 11:42 p.m., the teenager dialed 911. During the call with the emergency operator, Paris seemed desperate and distressed about the atrocious act he had just committed. When asked if the girl was bleeding, he admitted she was because he had inflicted several wounds on her. The operator instructed Paris to perform CPR while waiting for emergency services and provided the necessary directions. On the recording, Paris can be heard counting as if following the instructions, but investigators later concluded that he never attempted to revive her. This was deduced from the position of the little girl's body and the bloodstain patterns found at the scene. In an attempt to justify his actions, Paris told the operator that he had hallucinated and thought his little sister was a demon. Soon, the street outside was filled with police and paramedics. Paris was taken into custody and brought to the police station while the investigation began at their home. During interrogation, he again mentioned his demonic hallucinations, claiming he was sleeping with his sister and woke up to her face looking different, like a demon engulfed in flames. He said he thought she was possessed and attacked her in a panic attack. As Paris continued his account, however, he fell into contradictions. He mentioned feeling resentment towards his sister since her birth because he was no longer the center of attention. Initially, investigators thought jealousy might have motivated the attack, but then he revealed his original plan also included killing his mother when she returned home. After a long, confusing, and painful night, Charity arrived at the police station to see her son. The inconsolable mother was shattered but became emotional upon seeing Paris. She got up, hugged, and caressed him amid tears, showing him she was there for him. Paris's reaction, in contrast, was cold and emotionless. He simply sat and coldly asked her what she planned to do. When Charity broke down in tears asking what he meant, Paris reminded her that she had always said she could take someone's life if they harmed her children. His question was not out of fear, but rather a challenge. At that moment, Charity realized there was something very dark in her son. Following his arrest, Paris was charged with the murder but not tried as an adult, as the minimum age for adult prosecution in Texas is 14 years. Instead, he was charged in juvenile court and pleaded guilty to capital murder. Charity was left feeling confused and unsure of what to do next. Although Paris's defense team suggested he not plead guilty, for Charity, this was unthinkable. She couldn't hate her son and wanted him to be held accountable for his actions. Yet she also desperately sought to understand what had driven him to such extremes. While the prosecution aimed for a life sentence, his lawyer was preparing to secure the lightest sentence possible. As part of their efforts, the defense advised against Charity receiving mental health counseling, fearing that the prosecution might use the reports against Paris. Despite the traumatic ordeal she faced as the mother of both the victim and the perpetrator, she finally accessed counseling 2 years after the crime. She was diagnosed with severe post-traumatic stress disorder and depressive disorders. Charity lost 15 kilograms in 13 days, started self-harming, and harbored a strong desire to die. Nevertheless, she knew she had to be strong for Paris, whom she never stopped loving despite the circumstances. In the months following, Paris was in complete isolation. He didn't speak and communicated only through letters and drawings. 2 months before his sentencing, Paris began to reject simple instructions and became more violent. On one occasion, he repeatedly hit a fellow inmate in the face and received a warning for making derogatory comments about other inmates. He later flooded his cell and confronted guards who came to see what was happening. During evaluations, he referred to the crime against his sister with a smile on his face. Prison staff reported that Paris repeatedly tried to manipulate them into giving him his mother's address. At one point, Texas Department of Justice officials said he had hacked the jail's computer system, though the intent was unclear. During this time, 2 psychologists evaluated Paris, and a third reviewed the case. Each report described the boy as showing marked antisocial behavior, reduced empathy, and remorse. The first specialist wrote that he had a moderate risk of developing traits characteristic of psychopathy and pathological narcissism. The second asserted that the teenager displayed all the characteristics of a psychopath. The third went further, suggesting to Charity that she change her identity and move somewhere Paris could never find her. Paris was sentenced to 40 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 20 years, which is the maximum sentence for capital murder in a Texas juvenile court. Had he been an adult, he would have faced the death penalty. Paris will be eligible for parole for the first time in February 2027. If he is never granted parole, he will be released in February 2047, by which time he will be over 50 years old. 2 years after his sentencing, Paris made chilling and macabre confessions about his motivations. He revealed that his original plan was to take the life of his mother, Charity, but after much thought, he realized he wanted to make her suffer in a way that killing her would not achieve. By taking away her young daughter Ella, he knew Charity would suffer for the rest of her life. In 2013, 6 years after losing Ella, Charity became pregnant and decided to raise her new baby, Phoenix, on her own. Despite still being devastated by the loss of her beloved Ella, Phoenix brought life, joy, and a renewed will to move forward back into her life. However, Phoenix's arrival was not without challenges. He was born with a defective heart valve and had to undergo open heart surgery. Fortunately, he recovered successfully. When Paris learned of his mother's pregnancy, he sent her a letter expressing his happiness, even though he knew he would never be able to meet his half-brother in person due to legal restrictions preventing convicted felons from contacting minors under 17 years of age. This restriction was a relief for Charity, who never brought Phoenix to the prison. Although Paris and Phoenix never met in person, they talked over the phone when Charity called her eldest son. Despite trying to handle these interactions naturally, Charity always harbored the fear of doing something that might put Phoenix in danger from his brother. In 2013, at the age of 19, Paris was transferred to an adult prison. 6 years later, in 2019, he gained significant attention after an interview with journalist Piers Morgan. In the interview, a calm 26-year-old Paris claimed he never felt he achieved any goal by killing his sister. He expressed being completely different from the person he was at the time of the murder and acknowledged the deep hatred he once felt for his mother, though he admitted to harboring thoughts of committing a crime since he was very young. Paris' story inspired documentaries revealing his manipulative and narcissistic personality. However, he consistently insisted that he was not mentally ill. For a long time, Charity visited and communicated with Paris through letters and phone calls. She shared her story with various media outlets, explaining that after her daughter's death, nothing made sense anymore, marking the end of the life she knew. Reflecting on the past, she regretted relapsing into drug use, believing it injured Paris, but she did not regret how she raised him. In 2021, Charity declared that she had ceased all communication with Paris. This decision came after learning he had become involved with a woman on bail living 2 hours from her home. Charity acknowledged that while she still loved Paris as her son, she did not like the man he had become. Following the tragedy, Charity established a foundation named Ella in honor of her daughter, which also stands for Empathy, Love, Lessons, and Action in English. Through this initiative, she advises families of both victims of violent crimes and offenders. Having experienced both sides of such tragedies, first as a child when her mother was accused of her father's murder, and later as a mother when Paris committed his crime, Charity understands the profound impact violent crimes have on families. She feels that the best way to honor her daughter Ella is by helping others navigate adversity, regardless of which side of the story they are on. This foundation serves as a testament to her commitment to supporting those affected by violent crimes and creating a platform for healing and understanding. Charity's work aims to provide guidance and support to those facing similar challenges, helping them to find a path forward amidst the turmoil and pain caused by such life-altering events. After 13 years working, Charity decided to shut down the Ella Foundation to focus on her son Phoenix. And that's the end of today's case. As always, I appreciate your support for my work. If you subscribe, like, and share this video, It will help me continue creating content. This was another episode of Unreal True Crime. See you soon. Day after day, we are surrounded by the presence of criminals. We are spectators to the deepest darkness in human actions and the bizarre reality that someone's suffering can be a form of pleasure. As dedicated investigators of the criminal world, we're on a mission to uncover the most shocking crimes and get inside the minds of those who commit them. I am Luke, and today I bring you another Unreal True Crime. The sad story of Juliette Ledramiguet. Juliette Ledramiguet, affectionately known as Juju, was born on May 2, 2013. Her parents are Paraguayan Lilian Zapata and Frenchman Stéphane Ledramiguet, who gave the little girl both nationalities. Charlotte, the couple's firstborn, completed their family. Eventually, the spouses divorced, and Lilian joined Rainer Oberber, a German citizen who had arrived in Paraguay just a year before to settle in the country. It was known that he had worked on projects or campaigns related to human rights in Europe. Juliette had microcephaly, a neurological condition that causes motor disabilities and cognitive developmental delays. The girl was described as a cheerful, affectionate, and lively child who enjoyed playing outdoors. From mid-March 2020, Juliette had been living on a farm in the city of Emboscada with her mother, sister, and stepfather. According to reports about the case, Rainer convinced his partner to settle there when the quarantine was imposed due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Everything seemed tranquil and almost idyllic in this corner of the country, but that calm was unexpectedly and dramatically shattered on April 15, 2020. On that day, little Juliette disappeared without a trace while on the property where, in addition to her family, there were 2 workers. According to information released by the Paraguayan newspaper ABC on the morning of April 16, when the local school director realized that one of his students had been missing since the previous morning, he notified the authorities. Immediately, officers from the police station of Emboscada went to the residence of the family. It was at that moment that the mother reported her daughter's disappearance. Lilian said that the 7-year-old, who had difficulty moving, and the cognitive development of a 3-year-old, had gone missing at around 9:30 in the morning the previous day while playing in the gated complex where they lived, along with a pair of goats that were also missing. She explained that, as time passed without her daughter returning, she asked for help from some neighbors to search the property, but they were unsuccessful. A search operation was immediately launched, involving police officers with trained dogs and the participation of local residents. As the hours passed, fears for the safety of the young girl grew. No one could believe that something like this could happen in that peaceful place. Additionally, on April 17, a team accompanied Lilian to check 2 properties in different parts of Emboscada, where they had lived, but they found no traces of the child. On the same day and in the following days, alongside search efforts, various law enforcement agencies conducted interviews with the mother, stepfather, and workers at the location. They also requested information from the telephone companies of the adults responsible for the minor and individuals connected to the case, as well as reviewed security camera footage from nearby businesses. Some witnesses reported seeing the child for the last time on April 15 at 10 in the morning. Initially, the hypothesis was that the child had gone missing while following the goats. However, investigators considered this version unlikely since the child had difficulty moving, and the goats were pregnant and did not typically stray far from the area. The property covered about 30 hectares and included several buildings. With no traces of the child found on the property, the investigation was reinforced on April 20, with the addition of prosecutors from the anti-kidnapping unit. A day later, the goats with which Juliet was said to have been playing were found. They were found in good condition, 4 kilometers in a straight line from the house, passing through a densely wooded area. Due to her motor disability, it was impossible for the girl to make that journey with the animals. The next day, the police expanded the search nationwide. During the first 2 weeks of the investigation, the prosecution team conducted several searches on the family property. These inspections resulted in the discovery of blood traces in various places, including in a van driven by Reiner. In his initial statements to the prosecution, the German citizen claimed to have left the house twice in the mentioned vehicle on the day Juliet went missing. However, the police investigation would later determine that he had actually left the property a total of 3 times. In addition to the forensic and technical work being done to determine Reiner's possible involvement in the disappearance, officials in charge of the case obtained relevant information during their interviews with various witnesses. Juliet's nanny and one of the workers on the property told detectives that Reiner easily lost his patience when it came to the younger of his daughters. On the other hand, Juliet's sister, who was 10 years old at the time, made a statement using a special system, which is used to interview minors to ensure their safety and comfort. A day later, the young girl left the country as a protective measure to reunite with her biological father in Switzerland. The prosecutor in charge of the investigation detailed that a sports shoe, a sheet, a towel, and a carpet had been seized, all of which reacted to the blood detection reagent. He also stated that tests would be conducted to determine the origin of the blood residues. The representative of the public ministry reported that new searches had been conducted at various addresses and that 2 vans owned by Reiner had been seized, as well as electronic devices. He explained that although they were investigating the case as a missing persons case, they did not rule out any hypotheses, from an intrafamily matter to the involvement of a third party. It was also reported that a computer had mysteriously disappeared from the location. When questioned about it, Reiner stated that he had sent it for repairs but couldn't say where it was being examined. As the investigations continued and knowing that the authorities considered them as suspects, Reiner and Lillian made a video offering a reward of approximately 10 million Paraguayan guaraníes, approximately $1,400 at that time's exchange rate, for any valuable information that would help them find the child. In the message, they expressed that they were deeply affected. The mother spoke directly to her daughter, saying that she missed her, as did her sister. She also explained that they were under restrictions because they were being investigated. As the days passed, Lillian and Reiner changed their initial version, which pointed to Juliet having gone missing. Instead, they now claimed that Juliet may have been abducted from the property and deprived of her freedom, a change in position that also raised suspicions among the authorities. While the prosecutors had this hypothesis on the table, it seemed unlikely because there were 200 meters from the property's entrance to the place where the child was last seen. This implied that, to take the child, the perpetrator would have had to get out of a vehicle, open a wooden gate, enter with the car, take the child and the 2 goats that had also disappeared, close the gate again, and leave. However, it was not credible that the 3 people in the house at that time did not hear the sound of a vehicle. Based on the findings during the investigations, the prosecutors charged the mother and stepfather of the child with failing in their duty of care and education, as well as abandonment. On May 4, the public ministry searched the residence and arrested Lillian, 33, and Reiner, 55. The prosecution announced that both had declined to provide an interrogatory statement and were in preventive detention. One of the figures who appeared in the media and pointed to Reiner as a suspected person was Rufino Zapata, Lillian's father and Juliet's grandfather. During a radio interview, He stated that the family had strong suspicions that his daughter's partner could not stand the little girl. While he clarified that he could not accuse, the information they had made them think that the German citizen could be linked to his granddaughter's disappearance. Furthermore, the young girl's grandfather said he believed that his daughter knew something about what happened to her granddaughter and was under pressure not to give details about the case. He also expressed that Reiner was a horrible person and he feared what he might do. In mid-May, during a video call interview, Juliet's biological father expressed his trust in the detectives and requested that a complete investigation, especially Reiner. He mentioned that since Lillian joined the German citizen, she had distanced herself from her family and only associated with his circle. He said that he did not distrust Lillian, whom he considered a loving and careful mother, especially with Juliet. Additionally, he mentioned that his other daughter had told him about a very serious matter. He said that further investigation was needed and that he had some suspicions about what might have happened to the little girl, although he didn't know who was responsible. He was certain that it wasn't an accident. According to him, his elder daughter told him about the day her little sister disappeared. The girl said that while she, her mother, and other people were searching for Juliet, Reiner remained seated in front of his computer the entire time. He added that during that day and into the night, Lillian and the little girl were searching for Juliet, but they didn't have the help they needed. While defending his ex-wife, he also suggested that, in his opinion, she was a victim and had no idea what had happened. The father of the child appointed a group of lawyers, including Oscar Tuma, to represent him. The attorneys filed a series of complaints against Juliet's stepfather, accusing him of deprivation of liberty and taking the life of his daughter. Oscar Tuma had collaborated several times with an organization which had been working since 2013 for the protection of children in Paraguay, especially those declared missing. Reiner insisted on his innocence, stating that he had nothing to do with Juliet's disappearance. On May 18, the police once again searched the Juliet family's property, but found no trace of the child. The police and the prosecution had already conducted a series of inspections, especially in places where German citizens who were part of Reiner's circle stayed. Electronic devices, closed-circuit recordings, and documentation were seized. A more intense search was also ordered, considering the possibility that the child might be found deceased. Some buildings were examined, and floors were lifted, but none of these efforts yielded results. The media covered the case, especially the differences of opinion between Juliet's father and his lawyer, Oscar, who announced in early June that he was stepping away from the case. According to him, his job was to find the truth, but his client's demands would not allow it. When asked about it, he added that Stefan's decision to side solely against Reiner went against his convictions. The lawyer took the opportunity to explain that, in his opinion, all the pieces of evidence pointed to both of them as responsible for the child's disappearance. Despite intense efforts, the lack of results from the various actions undertaken caused frustration among both the investigators and the child's grandparents. However, as time went on, and based on information contained in various seized devices during searches, detectives made discoveries that changed the course of the investigation. On July 23, the prosecution expanded the charges against Juliet's stepfather to include possession of child sexual content. In a press conference, the investigators revealed that, after analyzing 80,000 photographs contained in the seized electronic devices, they found adult material and intimate images of Juliet and her sister. According to the prosecutor, they had indications that the stepfather of the minors had captured the images. The established truth concept dictates that the person who took the photograph is considered the alleged perpetrator. This was articulated in the reasons for the charges against Reiner, as the images were found on his cell phone. Early the following year, the prosecutor in charge of the case declared that the investigation into Juliet's disappearance was getting closer to the truth. However, 2 months later, the case remained unsolved, and a decision by the main suspect came as a surprise. On March 17, 2021, the child's stepfather offered 350 million Paraguayan guaraníes, approximately $44,600 at the exchange rate of that time, for information about Juliet's whereabouts. Through the lawyers who made the announcement, Rainer insisted on his innocence and claimed that he or the kidnappers of the child could have entered the property through the rolling gate or from the neighboring property. On that occasion, he defended the mother of the missing child, who was also being held against her will, and criticized the justice system, stating that he never imagined that the truth could be suppressed for so long and that judges and prosecutors were trampling the law. The following month, just before entering a hearing to provide an interrogatory statement, the German man made statements pointing to Rufino, Juliet's grandfather, and urged journalists to investigate his partner's father. "If you want to investigate a bit, I'll give you a clue. Approach or ask Juliet's grandfather, who always says he knows more. And maybe he does know more than he says. And all I can tell you is that angels will become demons, and demons will become angels," he said. Rufino reacted to the accusations made by the main suspect in the case, stating that these accusations were part of a strategy by the lawyers. He also called on the prosecutors to follow him wherever they wanted and reiterated that his family was available for cooperation. In that context, he also mentioned that he had lost contact with his daughter months ago and emphasized that, in his opinion, she must know something about what happened to his granddaughter. While awaiting trial, an appeals court granted Lilian limited freedom of movement. On September 24, 2021, Lilian Zapata was sentenced to 6 years in prison for failing in her duty of care and abandonment of her daughter. Despite the guilty verdict, she remained free pending the confirmation of her sentence. In the case of Rainer, unlike his partner, he was acquitted of these same charges. The court believed that he had no involvement in the act of abandonment. However, he still faced charges related to the possession of sexual content involving minors. Only 2 months later, on November 9, Lilian was once again sentenced. She was given an additional 2 years of imprisonment with the suspension of the sentence's execution, after being found guilty of contempt of a court order. The November ruling came in response to her refusal to undergo a DNA test, which was intended to determine if the blood traces found during the investigations matched the child. She also rejected a toxicology test that aimed to determine if she consumed narcotics. "I don't know. The prosecution never informs me of anything. They never communicated with me. From jail, I did everything for them to investigate, even sent a letter to the French embassy. All I ask is that they search for and find my daughter." Lilian refused, arguing that it was her body, and she wouldn't give consent for the tests. Before the end of 2021, the court revoked the decision to keep Rainer in preventive detention. The verdict established that the public ministry did not find sufficient evidence to incriminate him, absolving him of all guilt and penalty. In an unexpected turn of events, a video posted on a popular social network on May 31, 2022, showed a girl on the streets of Ecuador who appeared to have the same characteristics as young Juliet. The recording was apparently made in public by 2 foreigners. When asked about it, officials from the public ministry confirmed that the girl in the video seemed to be Juliet, but provided no further details to protect the ongoing investigation. Nevertheless, it was announced that a technical verification of the content and origin was being conducted. This information led Stefan to request a copy of the Swiss documents to travel to Ecuador to verify if the girl in the video that circulated on social media was Juliet. His request led to an incident at the airport, during which his older daughter, after visiting her mother in Paraguay, was detained by airport authorities when she was about to return to Europe. It was reported that officials found her missing sister's documents among the girl's belongings. As a result, the girl missed her flight, but there were no other reported consequences. In a new chapter of this case, judge ordered the capture of Lillian to enforce the prison sentence imposed in 2021 for the charges of violating her duty of care and abandonment. On August 16, 2023, Juliet's mother appeared before the court and requested the postponement of her imprisonment, invoking a provision in the Penal Code that allows the postponement of the sentence for mothers of children under 1 year old. However, on August 17, the court ruled against her request and ordered her immediate confinement at the National Women's Penitentiary, where she will serve her 6-year sentence. The judge mandated that her baby must receive pediatric care, social assistance, and all necessary care to ensure the well-being of the child and his mother during the breastfeeding stage. 3 years have passed since Juliet's disappearance, and many loose ends remain. One of the hypotheses being considered is that the girl disappeared on April 14, a day before the date the parents reported to the authorities, following an incident inside the house, and was subsequently moved to another location with the goats. To this day, it remains unconfirmed whether the blood found during the investigations belongs to Juliet, among other reasons due to the refusal of Lillian and the biological father to provide the necessary samples for DNA comparative studies. Nevertheless, Stefan remains vigilant for any progress in the investigations and has offered a reward for information leading to Juliet's whereabouts. Juliet's grandfather, Rufino, also refuses to give up. On several occasions, he has expressed his concern about the lack of results in the investigation and has requested the collaboration of the public to report any information or suspicions that could lead to Juliet's discovery. National authorities assure that the investigation is ongoing, and the police are following several leads. All that remains is to hope that the responsible party or parties for Juliet's disappearance confess, or that someone provides credible information that leads the authorities to the truth. And that's the end of today's case. As always, I appreciate your support for my work. If you subscribe, like, and share this video, it will help me continue creating content. This was another episode of Unreal True Crime. See you soon.